When Glenn King was young, I did my best to make him gay. Later, he hated me for leading him astray, and in revenge he imprisoned and hid me away. I was his secret lover for 5 years. I watched him change partners one after another, and finally he got rid of the stigma of being a homosexual and was getting married. He said, "You are the only stain on my life." As he wished, I got a terminal illness. His only stain could finally be gone. Glenn went crazy and sought out experts from all over the world to keep me alive. But I don't want to live anymore. The guy Glenn is dating now looks a bit like me. He is a student at a famous university in Jiangqing. He has a wealthy family and a lively and likable personality. Glenn changed his sexual orientation for him. Compared to his previous frequent changes of girlfriends, he stayed with Glenn for more than half a year. I called Glenn in the evening and asked him if he would come home for dinner. When the call was connected, I vaguely heard someone on the other end asking, "Who is it?" Glenn replied calmly, "A servant at home." He said no and then hung up. I listened to the busy tone on my cell phone and my heart ached. The attending physician said that my condition was not good and I might not survive this year. At 19, I had already had a heart transplant. Survive years of complications and rejection reactions. Finally, it has come to this. Now, I can only rely on expensive special medicine to prolong my life. And I don't know how long I can live. The day Harold Robinson came to visit, I was watering the garden with a watering can. It is called a garden, but in fact only a small piece is planted with roses, and the rest has been turned into a vegetable garden by me. The roses grown were given to Glenn. The fruits and vegetables are used to cook for Glenn. Harold stood not far away, looking at me quietly for a long time, and finally burst out laughing. I've heard that Glenn has a canary at home. Today, I found out it's a native sparrow. I felt a little embarrassed and lowered my head to brush off the dust on my apron. Compared to the person in front of me, I am indeed a little unkempt and not as young and handsome as him. Harold smiled and said, "No matter how long you stay with Glenn, I hope you will leave on your own initiative. Because you can never beat me." The butler who was leading the way reminded, "Harold, please watch your words." Harold paused. Only then did I see the ring on my hand, which was a pair with Glenn's. Harold's expression didn't change. "I'm just kidding." He said, "Can I have this guy show me around while I wait for Glenn to come back?" The butler nodded, "As you wish." I had no intention of taking him around, so I packed up my tools and left. Harold followed me slowly and said sarcastically, "It's just a broken ring. Do you think he loves you just because he wears it? How naive." That time when you called to ask him if he was coming home for dinner, Glenn said no, but he was actually accompanying me. He spent $20 million to buy this antique pendant on my neck as a gift to me. Has he ever given you such an expensive gift? I walked away and said casually, "No." "Where's the house? Where's the car? Have you ever received them?" "No, he never gave me anything." Harold's tone became more cheerful. "Have you ever heard the saying? Where a man's money is, there is his love." "Oh, congratulations." My nonchalant attitude made Harold mad. He raised his voice. "You can't get love or material things. You can't even be considered a lover. You can only be considered a clown. You don't believe it, right? Then let's try and see who Glenn cares about more." I stopped and saw Harold with a malicious smile on his face. He looked at me and stepped back. He dumped his body into the open-air swimming pool. When Glenn came back, Harold was still lying by the pool, his face pale as he choked on the water in his lungs. Glenn pulled the man into his arms and patted his back, then raised his eyes and asked, "What's going on?" Harold pointed his shaking finger at me. "He pushed me." "You're lying." I said calmly, "You can't swim, I saved you." Harold had another heart-wrenching coughing fit. He cried out, "You pushed me down. And you pulled me up because you were afraid I would drown. I'm just jealous, so what? You can show off your ring, but I can't show off the necklace Glenn bought me. It was you who mocked me first, and then you got angry again, saying that Glenn didn't give you anything and complained that Glenn didn't spend enough on you. Then why don't you give him to me? I'm not with him for money anyway." Glenn heard this and glanced over lightly. "Oh, did I mistreat you?" I have nothing to say. I would ask Glenn for $250,000 every month. He never asked me where the money went, and he didn't know I was taking special medicine. I go to the hospital once a month, and he thinks it's just a routine checkup and doesn't care. Even though I didn't give you anything, it wasn't really a bad treatment. I'm 26 years old, and I'm competing with a guy who just entered college. Glenn didn't bother to look at me anymore and returned his gaze to Harold's face. Why did you mess with him? He seemed to be blaming, but his tone was doting. Harold yelled, I just envy him for wearing the same ring as you, and you've never given me a ring. After hearing this, Glenn took off the ring and threw it into the water. Is this a mental balance? Harold looked smug and was about to speak. The next second, I jumped into the swimming pool and picked up the ring regardless of anything. I held my breath and searched in the water, but I couldn't find it. Everyone stood by the pool and watched my gaffe. I refused to give up and was determined to get the ring back. Until the heart gradually began to ache and the oxygen disappeared. My vision began to go dark, and the past flashed back to me. One Valentine's Day, the cinema was closed. Glenn and I witnessed a confession together. The boy gave the girl 99 roses. When the two hugged each other happily, everyone around them shouted their blessings for them. Glenn and I stood outside the crowd. They are obviously a couple, but they don't even dare to hold hands. Afterwards, I bought a pair of rings from a street stall and happily gave them to him. This is very ordinary, no one can tell that we are using a couple's pair. I can no longer remember Glenn's expression at that time. I just remember that he was very silent and never smiled from beginning to end. On the night of my birthday, Glenn called me out of the blue and asked me to go out and look at the sky. Sparks burst out in the sky above the city, and with a bang, a huge bird appeared. I murmured the letters, Glenn love Clyde. Glenn on the phone said, Happy birthday, Clyde. I envy others' open and honest love. This was Glenn's way of telling everyone in the city that he loved me. The fireworks lasted for a long time. It lasted so long that I burst into tears and ran to Glenn crying and said, Glenn, it's okay not to be bright, it's okay not to have roses, and it's okay not to have blessings. I just want to run away with you to the ends of the earth and hide. No one can find us. I want to marry you in Iceland. The country of ice and fire shrouded in coldness can accommodate all kinds of love that are not understood by the world. There, no one would blame us, and no one would say it was disgusting for two boys to be together. My heart hurts more and more. I woke up from my bed. When I opened my eyes, the young Glenn seemed to be sitting in front of me. I stared at him and laughed, but my nose felt sour. Glenn, Iceland is too far away, I can't go there. Glenn, I want to watch the fireworks one more time. 7. The desk lamp clicked on. Glenn, wearing a black shirt, stared at me quietly. His features were extremely handsome. There is always a layer of depression in his eyes that cannot be dispelled. When he looks at people without smiling, he is like a dark poisonous snake, making people afraid to approach him. Are you that jealous? Glenn smiled. He raised his hand and touched my face. I was a little slow to notice that Glenn had put the ring back on. I hugged him suddenly and murmured, Fortunately, it's not lost. That night, Glenn touched me for the first time in a long time. Touching my spine, he frowned and said, You're so skinny, haven't you been eating well recently? I said I haven't had a good appetite lately. Glenn just chuckled, then suppressed it. Halfway through, I hooked my arm around his neck, trembling, and said, Glenn, can you give me $500,000 this month? There is a newly developed drug in the United States that is said to be very effective in controlling heart disease. The downside is that it's expensive, costing $14,000 per piece. As soon as he finished speaking, Glenn paused. The temperature around them quickly cooled down, and after a long while, Glenn said, No wonder you were so proactive tonight. That's right. You approached me for money when you were in school. Glenn stood up, his emotionless eyes lowered. Sometimes I wish Harold was you, at least his love would be pure. And you have always been fake. Glenn pulled away and I grabbed his arm in panic. No. Glenn shook me off, turned his back to me and clicked on the message on his phone. Harold's voice came over, Glenn, This is a sweater I knitted for you by following a tutorial. It's my first time making it, so please don't despise it. Glenn softened and began to get dressed. He threw a bank card on the ground without even looking at me, then opened the door and left. This time Glenn left and disappeared for more than half a month. One night, I was woken up by the pain and tears started streaming down my face. Suddenly, a burst of fireworks appeared outside the window, accompanied by a loud bang of colorful lights, lighting up my eyes. My heart moved and I ran downstairs with full anticipation. Glenn. As soon as I shouted out 2 words, I was stunned. Harold, dressed in his best clothes, was surrounded by the crowd and looked at me with amusement. Hey, you are here to celebrate my birthday too? I glanced at Glenn, who was standing next to Harold, and fell silent. Glenn didn't even look at me. He handed Harold a box and said, "This is the gift you asked for." Harold was surprised and said, "You actually customized a ring for me." He hugged Glenn and kissed him on the cheek. "Put it on me, honey." Amid the boos of the whole room, Glenn held Harold's hand and put the ring on his finger himself. I was hurt by this scene and turned my head away, not wanting to watch it anymore. The whole night, Harold and Glenn were being affectionate with each other, and I was completely ignored in the corner. A few people came over with glasses of wine and talked to me. "I heard that you are Glenn's first love?" First love? Dark history is more like that. It is said that he cheated Glenn out of money and dumped her, but later he begged for reconciliation with a smug look on his face. I thought he was some kind of male vixen, but he looks like this? Homosexuality is a minority thing to begin with. If you really get together with someone like that, it's really embarrassing. I guess Glenn keeps him around just to humiliate him. Even if he finds a guy, he has to look like Harold to be presentable. I stood up and prepared to leave, but a pair of hands pushed me back. "Why are you leaving?" "They are just kidding." The boy in front of him was wearing branded clothes and seemed to be Harold's friend. He pushed a glass of wine into my hand and said maliciously, "It's Harold's birthday tonight, how about a drink to cheer him up?" I refused. "I don't drink." "Why? A grown man can't even drink?" "That's not the case," I said. "I have a heart condition and can't drink." As soon as these words were spoken, everyone around burst into laughter. "If you don't want to drink, then don't drink. You're pretending to be sick. Oh, you're so fragile and pathetic." "Okay." Harold's friend turned and shouted, "Harold, this guy said he had a heart disease in order not to drink. Is that true?" Harold snorted, his expression immediately becoming unhappy. Glenn looked over and rubbed his forehead irritably. "If you don't want to drink, get out of here. Don't ruin the fun here." I was stunned for a moment, then raised the glass again and drank it all in one gulp. "Happy birthday to you," I said to Harold. Harold smiled meaningfully. I still don't understand what his smile means. Until 10 minutes later, my head started to feel dizzy. I endured the discomfort, staggered back to the room, and fell on the bed. When I opened my eyes again, the lights were bright. There was a half-naked man lying next to me. The door of the room was pushed open violently. Harold and a group of people stood at the door, shouting in surprise, "Clifford Hughes, why are you here?" "Of course he brought me up here." The boy lit a cigarette slowly and said with a smile, "This slut wanted to seduce me because I had money. I didn't want to pay attention to him, but he drugged my wine." Glenn at the door had a blank expression on his face. "I don't." I was so frightened that I rolled off the bed in a panic. But suddenly I found that I was wearing a Rolex watch on my wrist. The boy was still laughing. "Just for a watch worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, he's willing to do anything. Glenn, this person." Before he could finish his words, Glenn grabbed his hair and pulled him off the bed, slamming him against the wall with a thud. "Ugh." The boy said in disbelief, "He seduced me." "Oh, so what?" Glenn kicked the other person so hard that he vomited blood. He took off his suit jacket and dragged the man downstairs alive. Immediately afterwards, screams were heard. As the dull sound of flesh being beaten grew, the voice gradually became weaker, as if he would die in the next second. I heard Harold crying, "Glenn! He's my friend. Please stop hitting him." Glenn's response was flat. "Oh, I forgot that you brought this person here." The outdoor swimming pool is splashing. Harold was thrown in. 11. Finally, Harold was pulled out of the water crying by his friends. The farce ended and everyone dispersed. But no one dared to save the boy. So, he is still lying in the yard, breathing weakly. Glenn seemed to be in a good mood. Played the piano late at night. He has other people's blood on his hands. Soon, the piano keys were also dyed red by him. He played faster and faster. In the end, he was almost smashing it. The terrifying accent filled the house, like the countless old wounds on his wrists, chaotic and crazy. I'm sorry. I hugged his waist from behind. Glenn, I didn't do anything like that, and I didn't have anything to do with him. Please stop being angry, okay? Stop it. Glenn suddenly grabbed my neck, his eyes red. Bitch. Having me is not enough. You want to seduce others. Do you like money so much? Why are you so cheap? If it weren't for you, I would have been married and had kids by now. Instead of being a weirdo who likes men. I tried countless women. In the end, I only fell in love with Harold, just because he had a teardrop mole like you. His grip tightened and I could hardly breathe. Just as I was about to lose consciousness, Glenn pushed me away. Sometimes I think I'm pretty mean. Glenn murmured. Clyde, let's just keep on rotting like this. Since you dragged me down this path, no one will let anyone off the hook. The next day, the housekeeper received a call late at night saying that Glenn was drunk and asked me to pick him up. When I pushed open the door of the box, the people inside were still living a life of luxury. Glenn was lying alone on the couch, his arms slouched down to the carpet, a cigarette between his fingers. You're here. He sat up slowly in the smoke and squinted at me. Tonight, here are the new business elites, Shanghai rich kids, directors, entrepreneurs. What they have in common is that they are all very rich. Clyde, I'll set you up with someone. Can you pick one? As soon as I finished speaking, countless eyes in the box turned to me. At this moment, I felt like I was falling into an icy cave. The smile in Glenn's eyes was blurry. I looked at him. I just feel infinite sadness in my heart. I don't choose, I only love you, I said. You're lying. Glenn was still laughing. I know who you are best. You won't love anyone except money and status, right? Don't hesitate, choose, I'll help you. I went up to him, hugged him and said, No, I love you. Glenn pushed me away. I continued to move closer, hugged him again and said again and again, I love you, I love you, I love you. Even though Glenn pushed me away every time. The last time, he got angry and smashed a wine glass. I'll fucking let you choose. I forced myself to hold back the bitterness in my eyes and looked at him and said, Glenn, no matter what I say or do, you won't believe me anymore. Glenn raised an eyebrow, looking nonchalant. I nodded. Okay. I looked around. He picked one at random and kissed that person on the face. It was quiet all around. Glenn just stood there. After a long while, he burst into laughter and smashed everything around him crazily. Okay, very good ta. He smiled with tears in his eyes. Clyde, I don't want to play with you anymore. A boomerang from 10 years ago. Finally it hit me. Glenn, I don't want to play with you anymore. I said to the boy in front of me. I approached you in the beginning only because you have a prominent family background, and I would feel a sense of accomplishment if I could make you gay. But your mom gave me a lot of money yesterday to leave you, so I don't want to go on. Glenn, you know my family is poor, and I don't want to say no. Despair appeared in Glenn's eyes. He shook his head and said, I don't believe it. He grabbed my hand tremblingly, like grabbing a life-saving straw. Did I do something wrong? I have a bad temper sometimes. This is the first time I like a boy. I have no experience. If you are not satisfied with anything, tell me and I will change it, okay? Or did my family threaten you? Is that right? What did she say to you? Don't be afraid, okay? If anything happens, we can face it together. Seeing that I was still silent, Glenn's eyes suddenly became moist. He choked and begged, I beg you, don't say you were just lying to me. I don't understand, other than my parents threatening you, I can't think of any reason for you to break up. I kept my face expressionless and slowly pulled his hand away. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry for approaching you for money. I turned and left. Glenn completely collapsed. He screamed and tried to chase me, but was caught by 2 medical staff. I don't believe it, I don't believe it. Clyde, I love you. Clyde, I love you. I couldn't help but look back. Glenn was seen being touched by the electric baton and fell down with convulsions. With its blood-red eyes wide open, it crawled towards me regardless of anything. The last time we met was in the school corridor. The favored son of heaven fell from the altar, and rumors drowned him like a storm. Ha! Your idol is a homosexual. It's a bit disgusting. He actually likes men, how strange. Glenn walked alone through the whispers. A dead look in the eyes. It only lit up when it saw me. I heard that he was electrocuted in the drug rehabilitation center for 2 months. I don't know if the sexual orientation has been corrected. I have no way of knowing, because I transferred to another school the next day. It was many years later that we met again. 15. After that night, Glenn disappeared for 2 days. The next news we heard from him was that he was engaged. The wedding will be held at the end of the month with the daughter of a famous group in Jiangxing. When I heard the news, I spat out a mouthful of sticky blood on the spot. I called him. Unable to get through. I sent him a message. He didn't reply. I wanted to go find him, but I couldn't leave the villa. I had angina and was trembling as I poured out my hands full of pills. But no matter what, I can't get rid of the pain that penetrates deep into my flesh and blood. Glenn, from when I confessed my love to you when I was young, to when I cruelly left you later, I began to regret it. I regret why I didn't persist a little longer and face it with you bravely. I feel guilty day and night for the tears you shed that day, and for the way you looked like a walking corpse when we met again. I want to start over with you. But you still chose to get married. Glenn, does electroshock therapy hurt? Glenn, are you disappointed in me? 16. The night before Glenn's wedding. I called him countless times since the day. He still didn't answer. After that vomiting of blood, my condition began to deteriorate rapidly. I endured the pain and asked the butler to help me pass the message. Ask Glenn to come back. I have something to say to him. Afterwards, he returned to his room, holding his chest and shivering. I said in my heart for the last time, I'll try one last time. Glenn, I'd like to explain everything to you if you just come. It was not my intention to break up. In fact, I have always loved you all these years. As long as you come, I am willing to use the rest of my life to continue loving you. Glenn, if you just come, if you just come? Glenn didn't come. 17. On June 2nd, it rained heavily. Glenn appeared in front of me in the early morning of our wedding night. He was still in his suit, smiling, and looked a little drunk. Now, I am finally a normal person. There was heavy rain outside the window accompanied by lightning, which illuminated his face for a moment. Congratulations to myself. In my 20+ years of life, you are the only stain that cannot be erased. Glenn whispered against my nose, if you were good, I would give you everything, but now there is nothing left for you. How about it, do you regret it? I don't want anything. I said hoarsely, give me back the ring. Glenn looked confused. A tear rolled down the corner of my eye. I raised my hand expressionlessly and repeated, give me back the ring. Glenn scoffed. What? You think you can't get anything from me anymore, so you want to break up with me again? Yes. Glenn's smile froze. I can't get it anymore, so I don't want to get it anymore. I'm in a hurry to find the next sponsor. Glenn's eyes were red with anger. Don't even think about it. He suddenly went crazy and kissed her hard. I stepped back, struggling, and he held me tighter. I tasted blood between my lips and teeth, and I raised my hand to slap him. Glenn tilted his head, his eyes cold. The expression on his face was so complicated, like mockery and pain. He turned away for a moment. Then he threw a box of money in front of me. Is 1 million enough to buy you a kiss? What about 2 million? 5 million? Seeing that I was indifferent, Glenn angrily waved away the banknotes in the room. Is 10 million enough? How much do you want to buy this bitch of yours? Is it 20 million or 100 million? Speak up. Don't you love money the most? Don't you fucking? I spat a mouthful of blood into his face. Blood kept pouring out of my mouth. Warm and sticky, soaking through my collar. I collapsed in agony. Glenn was confused. After many years, I finally dreamed of my mother who had passed away long ago. Mom, I can fly. When I was young, I stepped on a tall pile of straw. My mother was cutting straw and said, "Come down quickly. You're standing so high. You'll fall and get hurt and start crying." Mom, I really can fly. I'm Clyde and Clyde can fly. To prove it to her, I jumped. My mother dropped the sickle and ran over to catch me. When we fell together in the rice field, we were stunned and burst into laughter. The laughter grew louder and louder. It was so loud that it hurt my eardrums, and finally turned into a roar. I need a fucking heart. Glenn lost control and kicked over the medical cart, yelling at the doctor, "A life-saving heart. Sorry, there is currently no heart source suitable for him. And the patient has a history of heart transplants. If a second transplant is to be performed, I need to explain to you that the risks are very high. The surrounding sounds are very noisy." But after the doctor said this, Glenn fell silent. A long time passed. He then said in a hoarse voice, "No matter what method I use, I want him to be alive." That night, Glenn used his power to put pressure on cardiologists from all over the country to come and save my life. I was unconscious and my heart stopped several times. But Glenn wanted to force me to stay alive, so I had to survive. When I opened my eyes and saw Glenn in front of the bed again, I almost went crazy. That's enough. The oxygen tube, the indwelling needle, the ECG lead wires all over the body were all pulled off by me one by one. I rolled off the bed and grabbed Glenn's clothes. At least death is something I can choose, right? Your only stain is finally going to die, Glenn. You should be happy, right? I've been in pain for too long, Glenn. Please let me go. I've had enough of living. Can you please let me go? Glenn remained expressionless in the face of my request for death. However, there were slight bruises under his eyes and countless bloodshot veins in his eyes. Yeah. He wiped the hot tears from my face. Has that been enough? Glenn made a phone call. Soon, my sister, who was still in her senior year of high school, was brought in front of me. You always care about her, right? Glenn said, "If you dare to die, I'll let her go with you." 19. I'm already a strong bow. Even though I was rescued this time, I still felt drowsy all day and was rarely awake. Wake up for a short while each time. I want to talk to my sister whom I haven't seen for a long time. But she never pays attention to me. A week passed in a flash. Glenn came every day, looking more tired each time. In the middle of the night, when I was drowsy, I felt someone burying his head in my neck. His shoulders trembled slightly. "Clyde, why did it take so long?" Glenn's words were laced with pain. I had no idea of his true emotions and gently pushed him away. Glenn looked up. The red eyes looked like he hadn't slept for several nights. He said, "You can't be cured in China. I have already made the arrangements and will take you to the United States tomorrow." I whispered, "I'm not going." "Clyde, you shouldn't be mad at me." Glenn kissed the back of my hand and said hoarsely, "When you recover from your illness, it's okay if you don't forgive me." I just shook my head and said no. The next day, my sister, who had been ignoring me, suddenly asked, "Why don't you go to America?" She stared at me and asked, "How long are you going to embarrass yourself?" I was stunned. You are obviously a man, but you are willing to be kept by someone. How shameful do you want to be that you are acting out these hypocritical scenes? Mom didn't have such good conditions to treat her illness back then. It's not enough that you're pissing me off by being a lesbian. Are you going to drag me down now? My sister complained to me heartbreakingly. "Clyde, be a human being. I'm going to take the college entrance exam soon." 20. Finally, I whispered, "Okay, don't cry, I'll go." Before leaving, I left all my assets to my sister. I wanted to talk to her as much as possible before I left. After all, there's a chance I'll never come back. But my sister just took the card without saying a word and walked away without looking back. She also felt that her brother was a stain. 11 hours flight. I fell asleep on the plane. I had a lot of dreams, good and bad. I dreamed that Glenn's mother came to me and said that Glenn would rather be electrocuted until he vomited blood than say he didn't like my photo. It's impossible for our family to accept that he likes boys, so we will continue to correct him, even if it doesn't work. As a mother, I feel bad for him suffering. Maybe if you take the initiative to break up, he will give up. I used to think that such perverted aversion therapy only existed in the last century. I will break up and stop torturing him. I don't want any money either. Don't let him stay there. That's best. The woman stood up and left. You should take the money. After all, my son is very smart. Besides, doesn't your mother also have a heart disease? There are many things that cost money to deal with family genetic diseases. You should thank me. 21. The foreign treatment was far more painful than I had imagined. Forcibly extending my life makes my life worse than death. I knocked over the nurse's equipment tray several times and refused to let anyone approach me. Glenn held me in his arms and whispered coaxingly, "Counsel with me once more, okay? I'll find you a suitable heart soon and won't let you feel any pain again." No cooperation. No cooperation. No cooperation. I struggled hard and the needle was pulled out, bringing out a stream of blood. From the past till now, every time you looked at me in the past 10 years, it hurt 10,000 times more than it does now. How are you going to pay me back? You said you wouldn't hurt me again, Glenn. How are you going to repay me for all this? I'm crazy, insane. Like a terminally ill mental patient. Glenn remained silent and forbearing. She looked at me with those light brown eyes and called my name softly. Clyde. Clyde. He said, "Clyde, I'm sorry." The day after I said sorry, Glenn disappeared. When he reappeared, his hands were covered with knife marks. Blood scabs spread across his arms, like shackles cut by a sharp weapon. He's having a seizure. I always knew that Glenn had mental problems. So he took the medicine seriously and stopped making trouble. Every once in a while thereafter. As long as I don't cooperate with the treatment, Glenn will get new wounds on his body. Sometimes I would also see him swallowing unknown white pills. He looked gloomy, and when he heard the apology on the phone, he looked as depressed as a dog that had lost its home. What a dramatic joke. Glenn searched the entire world but couldn't find a heart to save me. 22. No matter how hard I tried, my condition kept getting worse. One day, I was shaking with pain and hid my hands under the quilt and refused to get the injection. It hurts so much. My hands were swollen and covered with needle marks. Glenn whispered to me. I closed my eyes groggily, about to fall asleep. There was a muffled explosion in the ward. I suddenly opened my eyes and saw Glenn holding a gun in his right hand, with his palm bleeding. Clyde, is this better? There was a hint of nervousness in his eyes. I was so shocked that I was speechless. Don't worry, I found a match. Glenn leaned over and pressed a kiss to the corner of my eye. Clyde, I won't let you die. Having said that, he turned and left. Not long after, a disheveled man broke into the ward. I was wrong, Clyde. I apologize. I shouldn't have framed you like that. Will you forgive me? It was Harold. I don't want to die. I'm a living person. I can't donate my heart. Can you please ask Glenn for me? Beg you. I don't want to die. He knelt down and kowtowed to me, again and again. My ears were ringing as I was bombarded by his words, but I was unable to respond. Glenn must be really crazy. Harold lay on the ground and cried for a while, then slowly raised his head. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have ended up like this. It's you who's to blame. It's you. If you want to die, then die quickly. You want to use my heart to survive? Do you deserve it? Do you deserve it? His voice was sharp and piercing. The next moment, Glenn, who had bandaged his wound, pushed the door open with a bang. His cool gaze fell on Harold. It's like looking at a dead object. 23. I finally realized that I should make a decision. I don't want to hurt anyone again, whether it's my family or anyone else. Glenn, let him go. I shouted softly. Glenn stood there motionless, so I continued, Glenn, come here. Hearing this name, he seemed to come back to his senses and suddenly looked at me. He didn't even notice that Harold had escaped. I lay in bed and watched him approach. Gaze at his eyes gently. Glenn, do you remember that I once said that I wanted to marry you in Iceland? Glenn seemed dazzled by my expression. After a few seconds, he said, I remember. Glenn, I've been bored here for too long. Before I die, I want to go see the aurora with you and see the legendary pure white church. I only have this one wish. Will you grant it to me? Glenn asked persistently, Who said you would die? He squatted down and held my hand as if he was holding a treasure. I know you're bored. I'll take you there when you feel better. I nodded, smiled and said okay. The following time was like pressing the accelerator key. After a week of lethargy and 2 emergency rescues, I miraculously recovered. The pain seemed to have never existed. My whole body felt relaxed, and I even had the energy to get out of bed and take a walk. The breeze blew through my empty hospital gown. I turned around and saw Glenn standing at the door, staring at me blankly. He couldn't see the doctor's solemn eyes, nor did he know what was called a last burst of vitality. He just took a few stiff steps. Then he accelerated towards me and pulled me into his arms. In an instant, I dreamed back to my youth. 24. When I was 18, Glenn was everything to me. But when I was 26, my heart was already desolate. Even setting foot on the Holy Land in my mind seemed so beyond my ability. On the first day, Glenn carried me on his back while we hiked through the mountains. I stared at the northern lights in the vast sky, with mist coming out of my nose. The next day, I felt the sea breeze blowing across the black sand beach, and no matter how thick my coat was, I couldn't help shivering. On the third day, we took a cruise on the glacier lagoon. I felt dizzy and wanted to vomit, but my hands were covered in blood. On the fourth day, I started to feel weak. I resisted the pain in my heart and pulled Glenn's sleeve. No need to rest, let's go to the sightseeing church. Glenn studied my expression. I smiled at him and said, I'm fine, it's just too cold here, I want to go back early. Good. Iceland in August has not yet entered the polar night, but it still gets dark very early. At the end of the distant Rainbow Road, the towering white church stands quietly in the sky. I vaguely heard the singing of hymns. Like fate, it guides me forward. Glenn held my hand and slowly walked to the end. There was no one around the church. It seemed as if there were only 2 of us left in the world. I left my camera in the car. Go get it. I want to take some pictures. I said this to Glenn. Glenn looked at me and went back to get his camera. I watched him walk away completely and then turn and walk into the church. 25. I walked for a long time. Just reached the top of the tower. It's not that the stairs to the top of the tower are difficult to climb. I was vomiting blood as I walked. Holding on to the cold stone pillar, I turned over and climbed up to the railing. The whole picture of the city looked lonely and magnificent from my perspective. I felt relaxed and happy for a moment, and my eyelids narrowed slightly. Glenn, I don't want to sleep forever in a cold hospital, nor do I want to die in your arms. Clyde, I have loved you all my life, but this time, I really want to forget you. Mom, I can fly. The tender voice of a child rang in my ears. The cold wind whistled and ruffled my clothes, but I saw the golden rice fields. I shouted happily, Mom, I can fly. I jumped down. 26. The heart was beating violently. At the moment of falling, I was grabbed tightly by a hand. Glenn's expression was ferocious, and there was great pain in his eyes. Yes, you don't care about anything any. Then what about me? I swayed in the wind and a drop of cold air fell on my face. I was a beat slow to react. Those are tears. It was you who had to show up, had to be close to me, had to say you loved me. I could have lived this boring life step by step. It was you who made everything go wrong. And what right do you have to come and go as you please? Sometimes I really hate myself. Why did I fall in love with you? You are poor, boring, plain-looking, your school uniform is washed white, and you wear a pair of broken sneakers. There is nothing I like about you, but I fell in love with you anyway. Even though I know it's wrong, even though I know I should say no, I just can't bear to do it. During the years we were apart, I tried countless ways to forget you. Do you understand that feeling? No one can attract me like you do. I want to kill you so much, but I can't do it. Is it love or hate? I don't even understand it myself, but Clyde, I can't bear to, Clyde, I can't bear to. Tears kept falling from his red eyes. The veins on one of his hands were bulging and he gradually became exhausted, but he still stretched out his other injured hand to pull me up. And I just looked back calmly. Then, he pried open his fingers one by one. Glenn, it was my fault for turning you gay that year. I have already been punished. So don't catch me this time. My body began to fall rapidly. The moment blood exploded before my eyes. Helpless cries echoed throughout the church, startling a flock of birds. Extra 1, Glenn's Treatment Diary. March 9/Sunny. It's my first time in a prison, and it feels like a school. But I'm not worried. My liking for you isn't a disease. Who can really cure me? Just missed you a little, Clyde. March 10/Sunny. It hurt so much. They tied me to a chair and gave me electric shock. March 15/Overcast. Use torture to force people to compromise. My parents actually believed in this kind of thing. I will never give in. Because I love you. March 18/Cloudy. Why break up? Why? May 21/Sunny. In order to leave, I had to undergo so-called treatment for these 2 months. I finally see you today, but the look you give me is so cold. Don't you really like me anymore, Clyde? May 22/Rain. Transferred to another school. I still can't believe that you really don't like me anymore. Impossible, my parents must have threatened you. It must be like this. May 30/Rain. Went to find you and was discovered. I was sent back to that damn detention center again. June 10/Sunny. I don't want to take medicine, I'm not sick. Miss you. I miss you so much. August 28/Sunny. After I came out this time, my mother hugged me and kept crying. Maybe I'm too thin, like a dead person. I still want to find you. But why did you disappear so completely? September 15/Rain. Looking for you, always looking for you. I must ask clearly. I don't believe you don't love me. September 17/Rain. It was taken back again. I want to kill my mother. I hate her. I hate everyone. October 1/Overcast. Wake up. My mother sent me to a mental hospital abroad. She felt that I was getting sicker and sicker. I spent my 19th birthday locked up. November 4/Cloudy. Knocked out the nurse and ran away. I dream of seeing you again. But you changed all your contact information. Also changed address. Why are you so cruel? I can't find you. December 27/Snow. I accept reality. Casual. I don't mind being electrocuted. December 28/Snow. The sparrow outside the window came to see me. You only. Why did it fly away? January 30/Snow. Always having nightmares. Then there was a brief amnesia. One time I looked at my mother and asked her who she was. She looked at me with disappointment. What are you disappointed about? I wanted to kill her. February 16/Overcast. Can't find it, can't find it, can't find it, can't find it, can't find it. How cruel, Clyde? Just for 2 million. Now, I really want to kill you. April 4/Sunny. My mother finally gave up on me. At her age, she actually wants to have a second child through IVF? Ha. Dead woman. December 9/Sunny. I haven't written this for 2 years. I heard some interesting things today. That's Glenn, the mad dog that everyone is afraid of. He has a mental illness and has not been completely cured after a long time of treatment abroad. It is not illegal for such a person to kill someone. It turns out that I have really become a mental patient. Clyde, you better not run into me again. December 21/Sunny. Clyde, if we ever meet again, I will never let you go, nor will I love you anymore. I want you to experience the pain of not being loved. Experience the feeling of missing someone until you go crazy. Oh, I forgot. In fact, you don't love me at all. Ha. I hate you. Clyde, I really hate you. There has been a lot of discussion in the circle recently. I heard that the Xie family openly engaged in feudal superstition and was looking for talented people to summon spirits, offering a reward of 2 million yuan. I heard it was for a man. What? Homosexuality. Is it that Glenn who doesn't recognize his relatives? He was quite crazy to begin with. I heard that he has been mentally unstable for a long time. Sia's house. The floor was covered with chicken blood and someone's old clothes were burning in a basin. A charlatan was singing and dancing, and from time to time he waved a handful of glutinous rice, splashing a few grains onto Glenn's face. Glenn is on the phone. Glenn, even though this is a marriage by agreement, you still have to play along with me, right? I know you're sad that your lover died, but… Glenn didn't finish listening and hung up. Suddenly, all the lights went out. The master's young disciple shouted, "It's done! Clyde has possessed my master!" Glenn's heart tightened and he looked over. The so-called heavenly master stood straight in the middle of the hall, saying in a sad voice, "Glenn, I miss you so much." Glenn was about to move forward when he stopped. With a violent look on his face, he walked forward and kicked him. He beat the other person half to death with punches and kicks. "Missed me? You said he missed me? He would rather commit suicide than stay with me. How dare you say he missed me?" The famous Taoist priest was admitted to the ICU. In the following days, no one dared to take Glenn's orders. Glenn raised the salary to $5 million. This time, an old man finally came. He had a lame leg and was leaning on a broken cane. When the old man walked into the room, Glenn was leaning against the ice coffin, smoking a half-smoked cigarette. The old man asked, "What's your request?" Glenn said, "I want him to be trapped in this house forever and never be able to go anywhere." The old man shook his head quickly. "I can't do it. This is too damning. Look at me, I've been damned like this, haven't I? Besides, hasn't he always been here?" The old man glanced at the window. "If you don't bury him properly, he will just be a wandering ghost and won't be able to be reborn." Glenn smiled sinisterly when he heard this. "Reincarnation? That's wishful thinking. You are my person in life and my ghost in death. Don't think I will let you go after you die." The old man smiled and Glenn looked over. "Why are you doing this? If he really doesn't want to stay, he can just disappear from this world. What will you do then? Even if you burn a handful of yellow paper, there's no soul left." Glenn was silent for a moment. He said, "I want to see him." The old man nodded. Without making any preparation, he took out 3 incense sticks, bowed, and lit them. Through the swirling smoke, Glenn could only see a ray of sunlight shining in from the window. Apart from that, there is nothing. He was about to lose his temper. A white figure suddenly appeared in the sunlight. It's so blurry that it seems like an illusion the more times I look at it. However blurry it was, Glenn could still recognize it. "Clyde." Glenn seemed to suddenly not know how to speak. He subconsciously took a few steps forward, then stopped suddenly, not daring to move forward. "He has a lot to say." But just as it started, the shadow gradually faded away and melted into the air along with the scent of incense. "Oh, it's over." The old man's voice sounded. "I really don't want to say a word to you." Glenn looked stunned and turned around to ask, "What?" But the old man didn't stay any longer and limped away. As he left, he kept saying, "They say revenge never ends. Oh, it's over now." Glenn stood alone in the huge house, and it took him a long time before he burst into laughter. He walked to the ice coffin and looked at the person inside as if he was looking at the most hated enemy in his life. Tears fell on the glass, and he muttered to himself, "You hate me so much?" That night, amid countless cigarette butts and alcohol on the floor, a raging fire engulfed the villa. Glenn rushed out holding Clyde's body, but many Hokage blocked his way. The wooden staircase collapsed with a loud bang, and Glenn gasped and glanced at the person in his arms. Then calmly returned the same way. "Don't try to fool me, Clyde, about it disappearing. Even if you die, don't think you can get rid of me." The flames burned the corners of Glenn's clothes, but he didn't move, just lowered his eyes and looked at Clyde intently. "Even if you die, be with me. I won't let you go. I won't let you go." He kept muttering this and let the flames engulf him. Let all the love or hate turn into a handful of scorched earth in the end.